A week after I moved into my new house, the phone rang. It was the previous owner. His name was Mitchell, a young tech entrepreneur who had heavily customized the property before selling it to me. His voice was trembling so badly I could barely understand him. He said he had forgotten to wipe the cloud storage synchronization for the living room security camera before handing over the keys. I was about to be deeply annoyed about the privacy breach when he cut me off. He said he happened to see a motion notification. He saw something on the stored footage. He told me it was about my son-in-law. He said I needed to see it immediately, that I should not tell a single soul, and that I had to come to his office alone. My name is William Gallagher. I am 70 years old, a retired civil engineer who spent 4 decades building load-bearing bridges and structural foundations across the state of Colorado. My life has always been governed by logic, concrete measurements, and undeniable facts. When my wife passed away 3 years ago, the massive family estate we had built together suddenly felt like a hollow museum of memories. I made the logical choice. I downsized. I handed the deed of our sprawling property over to my only daughter, Sarah, and her husband, Victor. Victor is a charismatic investment broker, a man with $1 million smile and impeccably tailored suits. He insisted on helping me transition into this new, manageable smart home in the Denver suburbs. He even asked for a spare physical key, claiming he wanted to come over while I was out to calibrate the complex smart television and surround sound system as a housewarming gift. I trusted him. I loved him like the son I never had. Driving to Mitchell's office in downtown Denver, a cold unease settled deep in my chest. The traffic on Interstate 25 felt agonizingly slow. I kept trying to rationalize the situation in my head. Maybe Victor had thrown a surprise gathering. Maybe he accidentally broke an expensive vase and was trying to hide it. But Mitchell's frantic, panicked tone did not fit a simple household accident. When I arrived, Mitchell led me into a soundproof glass conference room. He did not offer me coffee. He simply turned his sleek laptop toward me and pressed play on a video file. The screen showed the pristine interior of my new living room. Cardboard moving boxes were still neatly stacked in the corner. The timestamp in the lower right corner read, Tuesday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I knew exactly where I was at that precise moment. I was across town at my cardiologist's office for my routine quarterly checkup. The front door clicked open. Victor walked in. He was wearing his expensive charcoal trench coat, glancing over his shoulder nervously before shutting the heavy door. He did not walk over to the television. He did not carry any tools. He walked straight to the mahogany bookshelf where I kept my biometric safe, hidden behind a row of encyclopedias. I watched my breath caught tight in my throat as my son-in-law pulled a small black electronic decryption device from his pocket. He attached it to the digital keypad of my safe. Within 30 seconds, the heavy steel door popped open. He systematically pulled out my bank statements, my social security documents, and my retirement portfolio, snapping dozens of high-resolution photos with his phone. But the financial violation was not the thing that made my blood run entirely cold. Victor put the private papers back exactly as he had found them. Then he reached into the back of the safe and pulled out the amber prescription bottle containing my life-saving heart medication. He pulled a small plastic bag from his coat pocket. With terrifying surgical precision, he dumped my real pills into the bag and replaced them with identical-looking capsules from another container he brought with him. He sealed the bottle, placed it back into the safe, wiped down the keypad with a microfiber cloth, and walked out the door. The video ended. The screen went black. I sat in Mitchell's office, a deafening silence ringing in my ears, staring at my own pale reflection in the dark monitor. My son-in-law was not just a common thief. He was methodically planning to end my life. I drove back to my suburban home in a state of absolute dissociation. The Rocky Mountains loomed in the distance, casting long afternoon shadows across the highway, but I saw none of it. My engineer's mind, trained for decades to prevent structural collapses, was suddenly trying to process the catastrophic collapse of my own family. I parked in the driveway, walked through the front door, and went straight to the mahogany bookshelf. I opened the biometric safe with my fingerprint. Everything was perfectly arranged. The bank statements were neatly stacked in the manila folder. The amber pill bottle sat precisely where I always left it. If I had not seen the digital recording with my own eyes, I would never have known that a predator had violated my sanctuary. I picked up the bottle and unscrewed the child-proof cap. The capsules inside were the exact same shade of pale blue as my prescribed medication. The visual deception was flawless, but I needed to be absolutely certain. I took one of the blue capsules out of the bottle. I carefully pulled the two gelatin halves apart and poured a tiny fraction of the powder onto my fingertip. I touched it to my tongue. My real medication had a distinctly bitter medicinal bite. This powder tasted faintly of chalk and left a bizarre metallic residue on the roof of my mouth. A cold sweat broke out across my shoulders. This was not a generic substitute. This was a foreign, unknown substance. The realization hit me with the physical force of a freight train. Victor wasn't just stealing financial data from me. He was actively tampering with my life support. I did not confront him immediately. Confrontation without preparation is a fool's errand. If I raised my voice now, Victor would deny everything. He would claim the video was artificially manipulated, or worse, he would spin a narrative to my daughter that my mind was deteriorating due to old age and paranoia. I needed to see how deep the rot actually went. I needed to test the structural integrity of his lies. That Sunday, I hosted our weekly family dinner at my new house. It was a cherished tradition we had maintained since Sarah was a little girl. I spent the afternoon roasting a chicken, preparing mashed potatoes and green beans, letting the familiar, comforting sense of a safe home fill the rooms. When the doorbell rang, Victor was the first one through the door, carrying a bottle of expensive red wine and wearing a smile so bright it could blind you. He pulled me into a firm, masculine hug, clapping me on the back with practiced affection. Sarah followed closely behind him. Looking at my daughter now, with the horrible truth burning like a coal in my mind, I saw things I had been entirely too blind to notice before. Sarah was 34, but the vibrant, energetic girl who used to drag me to her college debate tournaments seemed to have completely vanished. She looked hollow. There were deep, dark circles meticulously concealed under heavy makeup. When we sat down at the dining table, she merely pushed the roasted chicken around her plate, staring blankly at the floral centerpiece. At one point during the meal, Victor reached over and placed a large, possessive hand on the back of her neck. It was a gesture that looked like sweet affection to an outsider, but I saw the microscopic flinch in Sarah's shoulders. Her muscles went entirely rigid under his grip. He was a master of public performance, projecting the flawless image of a loving husband and a dutiful son-in-law, completely masking the monster I had watched on that laptop screen. I waited until he poured the second glass of wine. I leaned back in my wooden chair, adopting the persona of a slightly confused, aging man losing his grip on his affairs. "I have a quick question for you two," I said, keeping my tone light and conversational. "I was looking for my property tax documents the other day, and I realized I might have misplaced a folder. Did either of you happen to drop by the house on Tuesday afternoon? I thought I heard the smart lock notification chime on my phone app, but I was at the cardiologist's office and forgot to check the log." I watched his face closely. There was not a single micro-expression of panic. His heart rate did not visibly increase. His breathing remained perfectly steady. The absolute sociopathy required to maintain that level of calm under pressure was genuinely terrifying. Victor set his wineglass down on the table and chuckled a warm, reassuring, deeply practiced sound. "Oh yes, Dad. I meant to tell you about that," he said, meeting my gaze with unwavering, honest eyes. "I actually swung by on my lunch break. I wanted to check the calibrations on your new smart thermostat. You know how brutal these Denver winters can get, and this house has a tricky zoned heating system. I didn't want you catching a cold your first week living here alone." He paused, taking a slow bite of his food, chewing thoughtfully, before delivering the absolute masterpiece of his lie. "While I was in the living room, I noticed your prescription pill bottle was sitting out on the side table, dangerously close to the floor heating vent. I know how sensitive those cardiovascular medications can be to temperature fluctuations. I didn't want the direct heat ruining your pills, so I went ahead and secured them inside your lockbox for you. I figured it was much safer there. I hope you don't mind me taking the liberty, Dad. I just want to make sure you are always taken care of." He smiled. It was a smile of pure, concentrated poison disguised as familial devotion. Sarah looked up at him, her tired eyes softening for a fraction of a second. "That is so sweet of you, Victor," she murmured, taking a slow sip of her water. I forced my facial muscles to relax completely. I let a grateful, warm expression wash over my face. "Thank you, Victor," I said, my voice thick with feigned emotion. "I must have left them out in a hurry before my appointment. I really appreciate you looking out for me like that." "That is incredibly thoughtful." He raised his wineglass to me. "Family is everything, Dad. We have to protect each other." I nodded, raising my water glass in return. But behind my warm smile, my engineering mind was ruthlessly dissecting his alibi piece by piece, tearing down the fragile scaffolding of his lies. First, the smart thermostat in this modern house is entirely cloud-based. It requires absolutely no physical calibration on the wall unit. Every single adjustment is handled remotely via the mobile application. Second, and most importantly, I have never, not once in my entire adult life, left my heart medication sitting on a side table. It stays locked inside the biometric safe because I am meticulously obsessive about my daily routines. He had handed me a plausible lie wrapped in the comforting blanket of concern. To a regular person, to a fearful old man, it would have been the perfect, undeniable excuse. It logically explained his physical presence in the house. It explained his interaction with the safe, and it perfectly explained his contact with the pills. But I knew the truth. I knew that the man sitting across my dining table, eating my food and holding my daughter's hand, had looked me dead in the eye and lied with the terrifying ease of an apex predator. I realized in that specific moment that if I confronted him now, he would pivot effortlessly. He would gaslight me. Sarah would instinctively defend him, believing his illusion of care, and he would simply find a quieter, more untraceable way to dispose of me. I could not just call the police and say my son-in-law moved my medication. I needed undeniable, devastating proof of his lethal intent. I needed to understand exactly why he wanted me dead, and I needed to ensure that when the hammer finally fell, it would crush his entire world to dust. The dinner ended with warm hugs and empty promises to visit again soon. I stood on my front porch, waving cheerfully, as their luxury sport utility vehicle backed out of my driveway. The red taillights faded into the cool Denver night. I walked back inside, locked the heavy front door, and went straight back to the safe. It was time to go to work. A week after moving into my new house, the previous owner called me. His voice was trembling. He said he had forgotten to disconnect the cloud storage for the living room security camera before handing over the keys. He happened to check his alerts and saw something horrifying about my son-in-law. He told me I needed to see it immediately, that I should tell no one and to come alone. When I got there, the screen played a high-definition video that left me entirely frozen. Before I continue this incredible story, let me know exactly where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family. My name is William Gallagher. I am 70 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted upon me. I worked as a civil engineer. When my wife passed away 3 years ago, our sprawling estate felt like a hollow museum of echoes. I decided to downsize logically. I handed the property deed over to my daughter Sarah and her husband Victor. Victor is an investment broker with $1 million smile and tailored suits. He helped me move into this smart home. He even asked for a spare physical key to calibrate the complex smart television while I was out. I trusted him completely. I loved him like a son. Driving to the previous owner's office downtown, a cold unease settled deep in my chest. I tried to rationalize the situation, but the tone did not fit an accident. When I arrived, the man led me into a soundproof glass conference room and pressed play on a video file. The screen showed my new living room perfectly intact. Cardboard boxes were neatly stacked. The timestamp read, Tuesday, 2 in the afternoon. I was across town at my cardiologist's office. The heavy front door opened. Victor walked in wearing his expensive coat, glancing over his shoulder nervously. He walked straight to the mahogany bookshelf where I kept my safe. I watched my breath caught tight in my throat as my son-in-law pulled a black electronic decryption device from his pocket. He attached it to the digital keypad. Within 30 seconds, the heavy steel door popped open. He systematically pulled out my bank statements and retirement portfolio, snapping dozens of high-resolution photos. But the financial violation was not what made my blood run cold. Victor put the private papers back. Then he reached into the back of the safe and pulled out the amber prescription bottle containing my life-saving heart medication. He dumped my pills into a bag, replacing them with identical capsules. He sealed the bottle, wiped down the keypad, and walked out without looking back. The video ended, and the screen went black. I sat in deafening silence, staring at my pale reflection. My son-in-law was methodically planning to end my life. I drove home in a state of absolute total dissociation. My engineer's mind, trained for decades to prevent structural collapses, tried to process the catastrophic collapse of my own family. I walked through the front door and went straight to the mahogany bookshelf. I opened the biometric safe with my thumbprint. Everything was perfectly arranged. The bank statements were neatly stacked in a folder. The amber pill bottle sat precisely where I always left it. Without the recording, I would never have known. I needed to test the structural integrity of his lies. That Sunday evening, I hosted our weekly family dinner at my new house. It was a cherished tradition we maintained for years. I spent the afternoon roasting a chicken and preparing side dishes, letting the comforting sense of a safe home fill the rooms. When the doorbell rang, Victor was the first one through the door, carrying wine and wearing a smile so bright it could blind you. He pulled me into a firm, masculine hug. Sarah followed closely behind him. Looking at my daughter now, with the horrible truth burning in my mind, I saw things I had been entirely blind to before. The vibrant, energetic girl who used to drag me to debate tournaments had vanished. She looked hollow and broken. There were deep, dark circles meticulously concealed under heavy makeup. She merely pushed the chicken around her plate, staring blankly at the floral centerpiece. At one point during the meal, Victor reached over and placed a large, possessive hand on the back of her neck. It looked like sweet affection to an outsider, but I saw the microscopic flinch in Sarah's shoulders. Her muscles went entirely rigid under his tight grip. He was a master of public performance, completely masking the monster I had watched on that laptop screen. I waited until he poured his second glass of red wine. I leaned back in my wooden chair, adopting the persona of a slightly confused, aging man, losing his grip on things. "I have a quick question for you two," I said, keeping my tone light and conversational. "I was looking for property tax documents today and realized I misplaced a green folder. Did either of you drop by the house on Tuesday afternoon? I thought I heard the smart lock chime." I watched his face closely. There was not a single micro-expression of panic or guilt. The absolute sociopathy required to maintain that calm under pressure was genuinely terrifying. Victor chuckled, a warm, reassuring, deeply practiced sound. "Oh yes, Dad. I meant to tell you about that," he said, meeting my gaze directly. "I swung by on my lunch break to check the intricate calibrations on your new smart thermostat. I didn't want you catching a cold your first week here." He paused, taking a bite of food, chewing thoughtfully, before delivering the absolute masterpiece of his lie. "While I was in the living room, I noticed your pill bottle sitting out on the side table, dangerously close to the floor heating vent. I didn't want the direct heat ruining your important pills, so I secured them inside your lockbox for you. I hope you don't mind me taking the liberty. I just want to make sure you are completely taken care of." It was a smile of pure, concentrated poison, disguised as familial devotion. Sarah looked up at him, her tired eyes softening for a fraction of a second. "That is so sweet of you, Victor," she murmured, taking a slow sip of her water. I forced my facial muscles to relax completely. I let a grateful, warm expression wash over my face. Thank you, Victor, I said, my voice thick with feigned emotion. I must have left them out in a hurry before my appointment. I really appreciate you looking out for me like that. That is incredibly thoughtful. He raised his wine glass to me across the table. Family is everything, Dad. We have to protect each other. I nodded, raising my water glass in return. But behind my warm smile, my engineering mind was ruthlessly dissecting his alibi piece by piece, tearing down the fragile scaffolding of his lies, preparing to absolutely destroy him. Trust is a wonderful gift, but absolute blind trust is a dangerous liability. The greatest weapon an abuser possesses is the unyielding belief that you will remain silent just to keep the peace. Never let the overwhelming fear of destroying your family prevent you from uncovering the horrifying truth, because a family built on deception and hidden cruelty is already irreparably broken. You must protect your assets, verify the true intentions of those around you, and always remember that genuine strength is not about enduring abuse. It is about having the absolute courage to burn down a toxic reality. Greed can quickly turn the people closest to us into absolute strangers, but the truth always finds the light eventually. Have you ever uncovered a painful truth about someone you trusted? Share your unique story in the comments below. Do not forget to subscribe for more unforgettable life stories. The next morning, I woke up long before the sun crested the Rocky Mountains. To catch a man who believed he was the smartest person in the room, I had to become the caricature he had drawn of me. I had to become the fading, clueless, fragile old man. I started by calling my daughter Sarah. I kept my voice deliberately weak, letting a slight tremor slip into my words. I asked her about a trivial medical bill I had already paid months ago, pretending to be confused by the paperwork. When Victor inevitably took the phone from her to explain it to me using that patronizing, overly patient tone he reserved for children and the elderly, I thanked him profusely. I apologized for being a burden. He assured me I was not, his voice dripping with synthetic warmth. I hung up the phone and felt a cold wave of disgust wash over me. The performance had officially begun. My first objective was the blue capsules. I needed undeniable scientific proof of exactly what Victor had placed inside my safe. I dressed in a heavy coat, pulled a baseball cap low over my forehead, and drove downtown to an independent toxicology laboratory I had found through an encrypted online search. I did not use my real name. I walked up to the pristine reception desk and introduced myself as Richard Montgomery. I handed the technician a sealed plastic bag containing 5 of the counterfeit capsules. I told him I needed a complete chemical breakdown, an absolute granular analysis of every single compound inside that powder. I paid the exorbitant rush fee in cold, hard cash, ensuring there would be no digital trail leading back to my bank accounts. The technician told me the results would be ready in a few days. I thanked him and walked out into the biting Denver air, knowing that piece of paper would eventually become the definitive cornerstone of Victor's maximum security prison sentence. My second objective required fortifying my perimeter. Victor clearly thought he was a ghost slipping in and out of my house undetected. He knew about the single security camera Mitchell had left in the living room, and he clearly believed that was the only electronic eye watching him. I decided to let him keep believing that. I left Mitchell's camera exactly where it was. It would serve as a brilliant decoy. But I needed my own eyes. I reached out to a private high-end security contractor I had worked with years ago on a highly classified civil infrastructure project. I knew their technicians were discreet, fast, and entirely off the grid. They arrived at my house in an unmarked van while Victor was securely anchored at his brokerage firm. I instructed the technicians to install 3 microscopic high-definition cameras equipped with highly sensitive audio receivers. We placed the first one inside the casing of the master bedroom smoke detector, providing a flawless overhead view of the biometric safe. We hid the second one inside the sleek air purifier, humming quietly in the hallway. The third was embedded directly into the kitchen overhead lighting fixture. Within 3 hours, my modest suburban home was transformed into a sophisticated surveillance fortress. I synced the encrypted feeds directly to a burner phone I purchased earlier that morning. Sitting at my kitchen island, I watched the crisp, clear footage of my own house on the small screen. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. I could see every corner, every shadow. The intricate web was completely woven. All I had to do now was wait for the spider to crawl back in. I did not have to wait long. Victor escalated his timeline almost immediately. The very next afternoon, the doorbell rang. I checked the hidden camera feed on my burner phone and saw Victor standing on my front porch, holding a large insulated thermos. I tucked the phone under a couch cushion, let my shoulders slump, and shuffled slowly to the door. When I opened it, Victor greeted me with that blinding, predatory smile. He told me he was worried about my health. He said Sarah had mentioned my confused phone call the other day, and he wanted to make sure I was eating properly. He brought homemade chicken soup, claiming he spent his entire morning cooking it just for me. The sheer audacity of his performance was staggering. He walked past me into the kitchen, taking complete control of my space. He poured the steaming soup into a bowl and set it on the dining table. Then he did exactly what I knew he would do. He walked over to the mahogany bookshelf and opened the safe. He brought my amber prescription bottle over to the table and set it down next to my water glass. "I want to make sure you take your medicine today, Dad," he said softly, his voice echoing with fake concern. "You have been so forgetful lately. We cannot have you missing a dose. Your heart needs to stay strong." He unscrewed the cap and tipped one of the pale blue poison-filled capsules into his large palm. He handed it to me. His dark eyes locked onto mine, watching me with an intense, unblinking focus. He was not just being helpful. He was ensuring the payload was delivered. He needed visual confirmation that I was consuming the toxic substance he had painstakingly procured. This was the test of my discipline. My engineering career had taught me how to keep my hands perfectly steady while dismantling active, unexploded ordnance on construction sites. This required the exact same intense physical control. I took the pill from his hand. I brought it to my lips, raising my water glass with my other hand. In one fluid, practiced motion, I slipped the pill beneath my tongue, took a large gulp of water, and swallowed audibly. I smiled at him, giving a slow, grateful nod. "There we go," I said, my voice raspy. "Thank you, Victor. My memory has been so cloudy lately. I truly do not know what I would do without you looking out for me." Victor smiled back, a deep, highly satisfied smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He patted my shoulder affectionately. "You never have to worry, Dad. I am always going to take care of you." He sat with me for exactly 20 minutes, making idle, empty conversation while I slowly ate the soup. Every single second he remained in my house felt like a suffocating eternity. The chalky, bitter taste of the pill dissolving slightly under my tongue made my stomach churn with disgust. Finally, he stood up, straightened his expensive winter coat, and told me he had to get back to the office. The moment the heavy front door clicked securely shut behind him, I rushed to the kitchen sink. I spat the partially dissolved capsule into the drain and aggressively washed my mouth out with scalding hot water. I leaned heavily against the quartz countertop, my chest heaving, a cold sweat drenching my shirt. This psychological warfare was going to be the most exhausting battle of my entire life. Once my heart rate returned to a normal rhythm, I dried my face with a cotton towel and walked into my home office. I needed to move to the next phase of the investigation. Poisoning a man is a desperate, chaotic act. It requires a motive so massive, so completely overwhelming, that murder becomes the only logical solution in the mind of the perpetrator. To find that motive, I had to follow the money. I picked up my encrypted burner phone and dialed the direct number for Gregory Sterling. Gregory is not just a lawyer. He has been my personal attorney and closest confidant for over 30 years. We navigated corporate contracts, city zoning laws, and the complex estate planning after my wife passed away. If anyone could uncover the financial truth without tipping off my son-in-law, it was him. I told Gregory we needed to meet immediately, but not at his downtown office where Victor occasionally did business. I chose an old, dimly lit steakhouse on the outskirts of the city, a place with heavy oak booths and absolute privacy. I arrived 30 minutes early, taking a corner booth facing the door. When Gregory slid into the booth across from me, his expression was a mix of deep concern and professional curiosity. He ordered a black coffee and leaned forward, resting his hands on the worn wooden table. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I handed him a secure digital drive containing a copy of the cloud storage video Mitchell had given me, along with a photocopy of the receipt from the independent toxicology laboratory. I watched my old friend's eyes widen as I calmly and methodically explained the sequence of events. I told him about the safe, the swapped pills, and the hidden cameras I had installed in my own home. Gregory is a man who has seen the darkest corners of corporate greed, but the color completely drained from his face as the reality of my words settled in. He asked me what I wanted him to do. I told him I needed a forensic deep dive into every single aspect of my personal finances, my credit history, and my estate. Furthermore, I needed him to absolutely dissect Victor and his investment brokerage firm. I wanted to know about every loan, every hidden bank account, and every failed project associated with his name. Gregory nodded, his jaw set in a hard line, and promised he would put his best forensic accountants on it immediately. The next 48 hours were an agonizing exercise in pure patience. To survive the waiting, I threw myself into my garden, maintaining the illusion of the clueless, happily retired father-in-law. But my mind was constantly analyzing my financial legacy. I spent 40 years working as a civil engineer. I built my entire life on the rigid principles of stability and structural integrity. That specific philosophy extended directly into my finances. I never spent more than I earned. I paid off my mortgages early. I invested consistently in low-risk, high-yield municipal bonds. By the time I reached my 70s, my credit score was a flawless 850. I had absolutely zero debt and a vast liquid portfolio. My pristine financial record was my life's pride, a fortress I had meticulously constructed to ensure my family would never experience the crushing weight of poverty I knew as a child. I had freely given Sarah and Victor the deed to my multi-million-dollar estate because I believed they shared those exact same values. I believed Victor was a successful, self-made man who simply needed a solid foundation to start his family. I was catastrophically wrong. On Thursday morning, my burner phone finally vibrated. Gregory told me to come to his private residence immediately. When I walked into his home study, the atmosphere was incredibly grim. His large mahogany desk was completely covered in thick stacks of printed financial documents, bank statements, and legal contracts. Gregory pointed to a leather chair, letting out a heavy, defeated sigh. He told me the illusion Victor projected to the world was a complete fabrication. Victor was not a successful broker. He was a desperate, drowning man. Gregory slid a thick, professionally bound contract across the desk toward me. I opened it, my eyes quickly scanning the dense legal jargon. It was a massive commercial property loan agreement for a luxury real estate development high in the mountains. The ambitious project had gone completely bankrupt 2 years ago, plagued by severe environmental violations and gross financial mismanagement. Victor had poured everything he had into it and lost it all. But that was not the worst part. Gregory tapped a specific page near the back of the contract. I looked down and felt the air completely leave my lungs. There at the bottom of the guarantor page was my name, William Gallagher. Next to it was my forged signature, a terrifyingly accurate reproduction of my handwriting. Below that was my social security number and a detailed list of my personal assets perfectly outlining my pristine credit history. Victor had completely weaponized my life's work. He had used my flawless financial reputation to secure a $4 million commercial loan, and he did not borrow this money from a traditional bank. Gregory explained that the lenders were a private, unregulated equity firm with deep, undeniable ties to a shadow syndicate known for ruthless, violent debt collection. Victor was currently defaulting on the massive monthly interest payments. The walls were closing in on him fast. If he did not pay the $4 million soon, these people would simply eliminate him. He had placed my name on the firing line to shield himself. The depth of his betrayal was staggering. He had stolen my identity, mortgaged my future, and sold my hard-earned legacy to dangerous criminals. I stared at the forged signature on the heavy paper, my mind racing through the horrific implications. Victor had trapped me in a lethal financial web. If I lived and eventually discovered this massive fraudulent loan, I would alert the federal authorities. Victor would instantly face decades in federal prison for wire fraud and identity theft. He could not allow me to live long enough to notice the $4 million hole attached to my Social Security number. Therefore, my sudden death from a cardiovascular event was not just a greedy shortcut to an inheritance. It was his only desperate escape route from a criminal syndicate. I looked up at Gregory across the desk. My old friend was watching me with sorrow and resolve. He quietly and carefully asked me how I wanted to proceed, warning me that taking this evidence to the local police might inadvertently alert Victor's dangerous creditors before we were fully prepared to strike. I placed my hands flat against the mahogany desk, feeling the solid wood beneath my palms. I clearly told Gregory we were not going to the local police just yet. I simply needed to understand exactly how Victor planned to profit from my death, beyond just escaping his creditors. I needed to see the final puzzle piece. The waiting ended 3 days later, with a crisp, professional voicemail from the independent toxicology laboratory. The technician, the same young man I had spoken to earlier, stated simply that my comprehensive chemical analysis was ready for collection. I drove back downtown, the morning frost clinging to the quiet Denver streets, my mind a fortress of calculated restraint. I walked into the brightly lit clinic and handed over my false identification. The technician did not smile as he slid a thick manila envelope across the polished counter. He looked at me with a profound, quiet concern. He told me that whatever I was investigating, I needed to involve the authorities immediately. He explained that he had run the samples through mass spectrometry twice because the initial readings were so remarkably alarming. I took the envelope out to my car, locking the doors, before breaking the seal. I unfolded the heavy multi-page report. The first page contained a standard chemical breakdown, but the executive summary at the bottom was written in plain, unmistakable English. The pale blue capsules Victor had meticulously placed into my lockbox were not inert chalk or harmless placebos. They contained a highly concentrated synthetic amphetamine compound, laced with a slow-acting vasoconstrictor. As a civil engineer, I understand pressure systems. I understand exactly what happens when you force a massive volume of fluid through a rapidly narrowing pipe. The resulting pressure creates a catastrophic structural blowout. The technician had included a detailed clinical note explaining the physiological impact. If a 70-year-old man with a documented history of mild cardiovascular issues consumed this specific cocktail every morning, it would artificially and violently spike his blood pressure. The stimulant would force the heart to beat erratically, demanding oxygen that the narrowing arteries could no longer provide. Within 4 to 7 days of consistent daily ingestion, the cardiovascular system would suffer a massive catastrophic failure. It would trigger a fatal myocardial infarction. The genius of the poison was its complete medical invisibility. Because of my existing medical history, no attending physician or county coroner would ever order a deep toxicological screen for obscure synthetic stimulants. They would simply look at my advanced age, look at my extensive medical chart, and officially rule it a natural tragic heart attack. My son-in-law was not just a desperate fraudster trying to cover his financial tracks. He was a highly organized, calculating murderer who had expertly engineered the perfect, untraceable execution. I sat in the cold car, the paperwork trembling slightly in my hands. The sheer suffocating evil of his plan settled heavily on my chest. I took a deep breath, forcing my racing heart rate to completely stabilize, and reached for my secure burner phone. I dialed Gregory. He answered on the first ring, his voice unusually tight and profoundly strained. He told me he had finally found it. He had found the absolute final puzzle piece we were desperately looking for, the ultimate financial motive that justified the brutal murder of a father-in-law. Gregory carefully explained that his forensic accountants had uncovered a massive, recently minted life insurance policy. It was a comprehensive $5 million policy taken out barely 3 months ago, perfectly timed with my transition into the new house. The policy was securely underwritten by a private offshore firm that specialized in high-value executive coverage. The extensive application contained my forged digital signature, heavily falsified medical records portraying me in perfect health, to secure the massive premium and a single unchangeable beneficiary clause. Victor had confidently listed himself as the sole and exclusive beneficiary of the entire $5 million. He did not even list Sarah as a secondary recipient. The horrific mathematics of his ruthless plan were suddenly crystal clear. Victor owed $4 million to a violent, unregulated shadow syndicate for his utterly failed luxury real estate development. The mounting interest was burying him alive. He needed an immediate massive influx of liquid cash to save his own life. If he simply murdered me, the offshore insurance company would quickly pay out the massive $5 million to him directly without a single question. He would instantly wire the $4 million to his ruthless creditors, completely wiping out his lethal, crushing debt. He would easily pocket the remaining $1 million as a comfortable tax-free profit, all while playing the flawless role of the grieving, supportive husband to my devastated daughter. He would subsequently inherit my remaining estate directly through Sarah, consolidate his absolute dictatorial control over her entire life, and walk away a wealthy, entirely unburdened man. He had systematically priced my life at $5 million and coldly decided I was absolutely worth significantly more to him dead than alive. I drove back to my quiet suburban home with a strange, profound clarity washing over me. The grief, the sorrow, and the paralyzing shock of betrayal completely evaporated from my mind. Those fragile emotions burned away entirely, leaving behind nothing but a cold, forged steel resolve. I walked confidently through the heavy front door and looked slowly around the quiet, highly secure house. I was no longer a betrayed father-in-law trying to comprehend a complex financial crime. I was a capable man fighting a desperate, necessary war for his own survival. I walked straight into the kitchen and stared directly at the hidden surveillance camera I had strategically installed in the overhead light fixture. Victor thought he was successfully hunting a weak, isolated, overly trusting old man. He thought I was blindly swallowing his customized poison every single morning, unknowingly ticking down the remaining days to my own staged demise. He had entirely underestimated the man who actively built a resilient 40-year legacy out of solid concrete and heavy iron. I thought deeply about Sarah, hopelessly trapped in that sprawling house with a smiling, remorseless psychopath. I thought about the innocent unborn child she was secretly carrying, a child who would inevitably be raised by a murderer if I somehow failed to stop him now. Victor had meticulously planned to use my sudden death to permanently enslave my daughter and steal her future. He firmly believed his sociopathic charm and his perfectly forged documents made him completely untouchable by the law. But he had made one catastrophic, monumental miscalculation. He had foolishly left me alive long enough to clearly see the hidden blueprints of his own destruction. I slowly walked over to the biometric safe, quietly opened the heavy steel door, and stared intently at the amber bottle of counterfeit pills. I was going to let him continue to believe his highly toxic plan was working perfectly. I was going to draw him deeply into the absolute center of his own trap, completely surround him with undeniable damning evidence, and happily watch as his entire fabricated life was torn apart piece by piece. I confidently picked up the secure burner phone to finally call Gregory and the federal authorities to end this. The long, exhausting time for quiet observation and gathering secret evidence was finally officially over. It was time to forcefully initiate the final devastating structural collapse of his corrupt world. The morning sun cast long, sharp shadows across the frost-covered lawns as I drove toward the downtown commercial district. I had spent the entire night meticulously calculating the precise load-bearing capacities of Victor's fragile criminal life. I knew exactly how to demolish him financially and legally, but there was one critical, irreplaceable element of this structure that required the utmost delicacy. My daughter. Sarah was the structural core I had to reinforce before I detonated the explosive charges beneath her husband. If I attacked Victor blindly, the resulting shockwave would completely shatter her. I needed to isolate her from his pervasive, suffocating influence and assess the true extent of the damage he had inflicted upon her spirit. Sarah worked as a senior curator at a prominent metropolitan art gallery, a position she had earned through years of brilliant, passionate dedication to her craft. It was a sanctuary Victor rarely visited, deeming it insufficiently lucrative for his specific brand of arrogant networking. I parked my car in the subterranean garage and took the heavy freight elevator up to the administrative floor. As I walked down the quiet carpeted hallway toward her private office, I caught sight of her through the frosted glass panel. She was sitting at her large drafting desk, staring blankly at a glowing computer screen. The vibrant, fiercely intelligent woman who used to passionately debate Renaissance history with me over Sunday dinners was entirely gone. She looked incredibly small, her shoulders hunched forward absently, twisting her gold wedding band around her thin finger. The deep dark circles under her eyes were starkly visible under the harsh fluorescent lighting. I knocked gently on the heavy wooden frame. She jumped, startled, her hand flying instinctively to her chest, before a forced, practiced smile stretched across her pale face. She quickly stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her professional skirt. "Dad." "What a surprise," she said, her voice artificially bright. "Is everything okay with the new house? Did Victor get the thermostat fixed for you yesterday?" I stepped into her office and quietly pushed the door shut behind me, ensuring the lock clicked into place. I did not return her fake smile. I looked deeply into her exhausted, fearful eyes. "The house is perfectly fine, Sarah," I said, keeping my tone incredibly soft and steady. "I am not here to talk about thermostats, and I am not here to talk about Victor. I am here to talk about you." Her posture immediately went rigid. The defensive scaffolding Victor had meticulously built around her mind instantly deployed. She retreated behind her desk, creating a physical barrier between us. "I am fine, Dad," she insisted, her words tumbling out in a rushed, panicked rhythm. "Work is just very demanding right now. The upcoming seasonal exhibition has everyone completely stressed. Victor has been working late hours at the brokerage, so I have been trying to manage the household overhead to support him. We are just busy. That is all. It is just a phase." It was the exact same script of plausible lies I had heard 1,000 times from victims of systemic abuse. I walked slowly to the guest chair across from her desk and sat down, resting my hands on my knees. I did not push. I simply let the profound, heavy silence fill the room. I let her hear the hollow echo of her own fabricated excuses. "Sarah," I said, my voice thick with a genuine fatherly sorrow that I did not have to fake. "You are my only child. I spent 30 years building bridges and reinforcing concrete foundations to ensure they could withstand catastrophic pressure. But the only structure I ever truly cared about protecting was you. I know you are drowning. I can see it in your eyes. I can see it in the way you flinch when he enters a room. Please do not lie to me. You do not have to protect him from me." For a long, agonizing moment, she simply stared at her hands resting on the polished desk. I watched the internal battle waging behind her eyes. The terrifying programming of her abuser was actively fighting against the desperate, starving need for a father's unconditional safety. Then a single silent tear slipped down her cheek, landing softly on a printed requisition form. The dam holding back years of suppressed agony finally completely shattered. She collapsed into her chair, covering her face with both hands, letting out a raw, guttural sob that absolutely tore my heart into jagged pieces. I immediately stood up, walked around the desk, and pulled her into my arms. She buried her face against my heavy winter coat, weeping with the profound, exhausting intensity of a woman who had been carrying the weight of the world in total, terrifying isolation. I simply held her, running my hand over her hair, murmuring soft, reassuring words, until the violent shaking slowly subsided into exhausted, rhythmic hiccups. When she finally looked up, her face was completely stripped of all its protective masks. The horrifying truth spilled from her lips in a rapid, continuous flood of whispered confessions. "Dad, he took everything," she choked out, her fingers digging painfully into the fabric of my sleeve. "2 years ago, he convinced me to sign over the exclusive power of attorney for my personal college savings accounts. He said he was going to invest the funds in a secure, high-yield municipal portfolio. I checked the balances last month when he left his laptop unlocked. The accounts are completely empty. Every single cent is gone." My jaw tightened, but I kept my facial expression carefully neutral, encouraging her to continue. I asked her about the massive, sprawling house they lived in, the property I had partially funded when they first married. Her eyes squeezed shut as fresh tears fell. "He took out 2 massive second mortgages on the property," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He forged my signature on the secondary loan documents. When I confronted him about the missing money and the forged paperwork, he completely exploded. He cornered me in the kitchen and screamed at me for hours. He told me I was financially illiterate, that I was ruining his brilliant investment strategies with my pathetic, nagging paranoia. He said, if I ever told you or anyone else about our internal financial arrangements, he would destroy my reputation and leave me completely destitute." The sheer scale of his domestic terrorism was nauseating. He was not just stealing from his wealthy father-in-law. He was systematically, brutally stripping his own wife of every single resource she possessed, entirely isolating her and trapping her in a prison of paralyzing debt and emotional terror. I gently wiped a tear from her cheek with my thumb. "Why did not you pack a bag and leave him, Sarah?" I asked softly. "You know my door is always open to you. You know I would protect you." She looked away, staring blankly at the wall, her body trembling with a new, distinct type of terror. "Because he told me exactly what he would do if I ever tried to walk out that front door," she whispered, her voice completely devoid of hope. "He told me he would hire the most vicious, expensive corporate litigators in the state. He told me he would twist my history of generalized anxiety into a diagnosis of severe mental instability. He swore he would drag me through a humiliating, brutal public trial and ensure I never saw the light of day again. But Dad, that is not the worst part." She placed a trembling hand flat against her lower abdomen. I looked down, my breath catching instantly in my throat, as the devastating reality of her gesture washed over me. "I am 14 weeks pregnant." "Dad," she sobbed, looking back up into my eyes. "Victor does not know yet. I have been terrified to tell him. During his last rage, when I threatened to leave, he told me that if we ever had a child, and I tried to initiate a divorce, he would use his massive financial leverage to take absolute exclusive custody. He looked me dead in the eye and swore I would never see my own baby again. I am so trapped, Dad. I am completely, utterly trapped." A cold, absolute silence descended upon my mind. Every remaining shred of human empathy or mercy I might have unknowingly harbored for Victor evaporated into a hard, unforgiving vacuum. He was poisoning my heart medication to steal my $5 million life insurance policy to pay off a violent criminal syndicate. He had bankrupted my daughter emotionally, terrorized her, and was now actively threatening the safety and custody of my unborn grandchild. He was not just a greedy man. He was a malignant, cancerous tumor that needed to be surgically and violently excised from our family tree. I knelt on the carpeted floor beside her chair, grasping both of her cold, trembling hands firmly in mine. I looked directly into her terrified eyes, channeling every ounce of absolute, unyielding certainty I possessed into my voice. "Sarah, listen to me very carefully," I said. my tone resonating with the heavy, undeniable authority of a man who has spent a lifetime building unbreakable foundations. You are not trapped. You are a Gallagher, and we do not break under pressure. You are going to wipe your face, you are going to reapply your makeup, and you are going to go back to that house tonight and pretend absolutely nothing has changed. You will smile at him, you will eat dinner with him, and you will play the role of the tired, obedient wife for exactly 2 more days. She looked at me, confusion and fear wrestling in her exhausted eyes. 2 days, she whispered. Why 2 days, Dad? What are you going to do? I squeezed her hands, a fierce, protective fire burning deeply within my chest. I am going to do what I have done my entire life, Sarah. I am going to identify a critical structural failure, and I am going to completely demolish the building. But you must trust me, and you must maintain absolute silence. Victor is a desperate, dangerous man, and he believes he is entirely in control. We are going to let his own blinding arrogance dig his grave. When the dust finally settles, you will be completely free. You will be financially secure, and you will raise my grandchild without ever having to look over your shoulder again. Do you understand me? She stared at my face, searching for any trace of hesitation. Finding none, the smallest, most fragile flicker of genuine hope ignited in her dark eyes. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. I pulled her into one last fierce embrace, silently vowing to the universe that Victor's corrupt, poisoned empire was about to experience a catastrophic terminal collapse. I left Sarah sitting at her drafting desk, with a renewed sense of purpose radiating from her posture. The paralyzing terror that had gripped her when I first walked into the gallery had been replaced by a quiet, determined resilience. Driving away from the Metropolitan Art District, the cold Denver morning felt sharper, crystal clear against my windshield. I navigated the busy city streets with absolute precision, my mind functioning like a highly calibrated machine. I had successfully insulated the most critical load-bearing pillar of my family. Now I could finally bring the entire corrupt edifice crashing down upon Victor. I drove directly to the federal building downtown, bypassing Gregory's private residence entirely. My attorney had already made the necessary preliminary calls to the authorities based on the financial documents and the toxicology report. Navigating the stringent security protocols of the federal building took patience, but I finally walked into the secured conference room on the 5th floor. Gregory was waiting for me alongside 3 stern-looking agents from a specialized federal task force. They were not local police detectives handling a simple domestic dispute. They were federal investigators tasked with dismantling high-level wire fraud, interstate identity theft, and premeditated murder for financial gain. I took a seat at the long table and placed my encrypted burner phone down, projecting the hidden camera feeds onto the large monitor on the wall. The room fell into absolute silence as the agents watched the high-definition footage of my son-in-law deliberately swapping my life-saving cardiovascular medication with lethal synthetic amphetamines. I handed over the thick manila envelope containing the independent laboratory toxicology report, watching closely as the lead federal agent scanned the devastating chemical breakdown. Gregory laid out the massive paper trail detailing the forged $4 million commercial real estate loan and the fraudulent $5 million offshore life insurance policy. The sheer, overwhelming magnitude of Victor's criminal enterprise was laid bare across the polished mahogany table. He had crossed federal lines, defrauded financial institutions, engaged with an unregulated shadow syndicate, and actively conspired to commit a medically untraceable homicide. The lead agent, a tall man with piercing blue eyes and a calm, incredibly methodical demeanor, explained the complex legal mechanics of our situation. Having video footage of Victor tampering with the pills was incredible evidence, but a clever, highly paid defense attorney might argue he was merely swapping them for placebos, out of misguided concern, attempting to plead down to a much lesser charge. To secure a watertight federal indictment that would lock Victor away for the rest of his natural life, without the possibility of parole, they needed to catch him actively finalizing the extortion and the murder plot. They needed him to explicitly confess his malicious intent on a federally monitored wire while believing his plan was succeeding. We had to orchestrate a flawless, high-stakes sting operation, and I had to be the bait. I did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. I told them to outline exactly what they needed me to do. The agents explained that Victor was currently operating under the firm assumption that his slow-acting poison was actively destroying my cardiovascular system from the inside out. We needed to validate his arrogant assumption. We needed to convince him that his lethal timeline was culminating exactly as he had meticulously engineered it. I was instructed to lure him into my home under the pretense of a severe medical emergency, combined with a sudden, desperate urge to finalize my estate planning before my impending demise. The trap required me to offer him the ultimate prize he had been desperately chasing: total, unhindered legal control over my finances through a sweeping power of attorney document. To sell the illusion perfectly, I had to physically transform myself into a man on the very brink of a massive heart attack. Over the next 48 hours, I completely abandoned my strict grooming routine. I stopped coloring the silver at my temples, allowing my hair to look unkempt and terribly neglected. I skipped meals, shedding a few noticeable pounds to give my face a slightly gaunt, hollow appearance. An undercover federal technician visited my home and provided me with specialized theatrical makeup. I stood in front of my brightly lit bathroom mirror, carefully applying a pale, sickly foundation to my skin, adding subtle purplish shadows beneath my eyes and around my lips to mimic profound cardiovascular distress and severe oxygen deprivation. The reflection staring back at me was genuinely terrifying to behold. I looked exactly like a fragile 70-year-old man whose heart was rapidly and terminally failing. The federal agents had spent the entire morning secretly wiring my living room, dining room, and study with highly sophisticated court-admissible recording equipment, ensuring every single syllable spoken in that house would be captured and instantly transmitted to their mobile command center, parked 2 blocks away in an unmarked utility van. With the hidden cameras rolling and the federal agents actively listening on the secure wire, I picked up my phone and dialed Victor's personal cell number. I deliberately hunched my shoulders forward, constricting my diaphragm to make my breathing sound shallow, wet, and profoundly labored. When he answered, his voice was smooth, confident, and professional, completely unaware of the massive trap closing tightly around him. I forced a wet, rattling cough deep into the receiver. "Victor." I gasped, my voice trembling with manufactured panic and exhaustion. "Victor, I need you to come over right now. I feel absolutely terrible. My chest is tight, and my heart is racing so fast I can barely breathe. I am so incredibly weak." I paused, letting out another ragged, desperate breath, perfectly playing the role of a terrified, dying man. "I need you to hurry. I was looking through some old estate papers and I realized my legal affairs are a complete mess. If something happens to me today, Sarah will be overwhelmed. I need you to help me draft a sweeping power of attorney immediately. Just in case, Victor. Just in case I do not make it through the night. Please hurry." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, but it spoke volumes. I could hear the greedy gears grinding in his sociopathic mind. His lethal investment was paying off, and the ultimate financial prize was begging to be handed over. "Oh my God, Dad!" he exclaimed instantly, shifting into his practiced, caring persona. "Do not panic. Stay exactly where you are and try to take slow breaths. I am leaving the brokerage right this second. I will be there in 20 minutes. Do not call anyone else. I have everything under control. I will take care of the paperwork and make sure you and Sarah are protected. Hang on. I am coming." The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone, wiping a bead of sweat from my forehead. The performance was flawless. He had swallowed the bait whole, blinded by his own overwhelming arrogance. I walked over to the dining table and sat down. The agents were listening. The stage was set. I waited silently for him. I lay perfectly still on top of the heavy duvet cover in my master bedroom, staring up at the ceiling. The silence in the house was heavy and absolute, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Tucked deep inside my right ear canal was a flesh-colored micro-receiver, practically invisible to the naked eye. Through it, I could hear the steady, calm breathing of the federal agents stationed inside the disguised plumbing truck, parked discreetly 2 blocks away. The lead agent, whose voice had become a tether to reality over the past few hours, murmured a quick status update. He confirmed that the luxury sedan had just turned onto my street. They had him on satellite tracking. He was driving exactly 5 miles over the speed limit. Fast enough to seem slightly hurried, but not frantic enough to draw the attention of local law enforcement. A man racing to save his dying father-in-law would be laying on the horn, running red lights, and begging emergency dispatchers for an ambulance. Victor was doing none of those things. He was simply commuting to his final payday. I adjusted the collar of my shirt, making sure the pale, theatrical makeup was perfectly blended down my neck. I practiced slowing my breathing deliberately, making each exhalation sound wet and shallow. The trap was primed. A moment later, the distinct crunch of tires on my gravel driveway echoed through the quiet house. I closed my eyes, leaving them reduced to narrow slits, and focused entirely on the audio feed coming through the earpiece. The lead agent reported that Victor had exited the vehicle, but he was not rushing toward the front door. Instead, he had walked around to the passenger side to open the door for a second individual. The hidden camera embedded in my porch light flared to life, transmitting the live video feed directly to the Federal Command Center. The agent described a short, nervous-looking man carrying a thick leather briefcase. It was not a paramedic. It was not a doctor carrying a medical bag. It was a corrupt, sleazy notary public Victor had clearly kept on his shadow payroll for emergencies exactly like this one. The sheer terrifying audacity of the move solidified everything. Victor had received a phone call from an elderly man experiencing a catastrophic cardiac event, and his immediate calculated response was to procure a legal witness to sign away an estate. The heavy front door chimed as the smart lock disengaged. Heavy footsteps echoed in the foyer, followed by the softer, hesitant shuffling of the notary. I could hear their voices carrying clearly up the carpeted stairs. Victor instructed the notary to wait in the living room and unpack the documents. His tone was not panicked. It was crisp, authoritative, and chillingly businesslike. He told the man to prepare the general power of attorney forms, the asset transfer deeds, and the final will amendments. Through my earpiece, the federal agent relayed a real-time description of the living room feed. Victor was pacing back and forth across the hardwood floor, his hands shoved deep into his tailored trouser pockets. The notary was nervously clicking a pen, pulling stacks of dense legal paperwork from his briefcase and arranging them on the coffee table. Victor was deliberately stalling. He was giving the synthetic amphetamines more time to ravage my cardiovascular system. He wanted me weak, disoriented, and entirely incapable of resisting the pen when he finally placed it in my trembling hand. Every second he delayed calling emergency services was another nail in his own coffin, perfectly documented by the high-definition cameras I had hidden in the smoke detectors and air purifiers. The federal agents were recording every single movement, every rustle of paper, every damning piece of circumstantial evidence. Then, the most crucial moment of the entire operation unfolded. Victor pulled his cell phone from his pocket and dialed a number. The agent in my ear instructed me to remain absolutely silent. The microscopic audio receivers hidden throughout the living room amplified his hushed, urgent voice. He was not calling a hospital. He was calling his creditors. He spoke in low, rapid bursts, demanding to speak to the primary collector of the Shadow Syndicate. I listened as my son-in-law explicitly laid out the horrific mechanics of his criminal enterprise. He told the man on the other end of the line to call off his enforcers. He stated with absolute arrogant certainty that the old man was fading tonight. He confidently guaranteed that the sweeping power of attorney would be signed within the hour, giving him total control of my liquid assets. He then promised that the massive $5 million offshore life insurance policy would pay out by the middle of next week. He explicitly detailed how he had orchestrated the fatal medical event, bragging about the untraceable nature of the counterfeit medication he had procured. "You will get your $4 million, Victor sneered into the phone, his voice dripping with venomous pride. "Just back off and let me finish the job." The profound silence that followed his vile confession was broken only by the steady, triumphant voice of the lead agent echoing in my earpiece. "We have it, Mr. Gallagher," the agent whispered, a tone of deep professional satisfaction resonating through the micro receiver. "We have the explicit motive, the detailed admission of premeditated murder, and the direct connection to the wire fraud and the illegal syndicate. The recording is pristine. We have everything we need to bury him forever." A wave of cold, absolute clarity washed over me. The agonizing months of suspicion, the terrifying revelation of the poisoned pills, and the heartbreaking confession of my abused daughter had all culminated in this exact, perfect moment. I was no longer a victim waiting to be slaughtered in my own bed. I was the architect of his total destruction. The emotional detachment required for this level of deception was immense, but the thought of Sarah and my unborn grandchild fueled my resolve. Victor had viewed my love for my family as a pathetic weakness, a vulnerability he could easily exploit for his own boundless greed. He failed to realize that a father defending his child does not possess weaknesses. He only possesses an unbreakable, terrifying strength. The heavy, deliberate sound of footsteps began to slowly ascend the wooden staircase. Victor had finished his call and was coming up to collect his morbid prize. The agent in my ear gave a swift, final command, confirming that the tactical team was silently moving into position around the perimeter of my property, waiting for my specific signal to breach the doors. I adjusted my body on the mattress, contorting my limbs to appear cramped and severely agonizing. I let my jaw hang slightly slack, my eyes fluttering half-closed as I stared at the dark wooden grain of the bedroom door. The footsteps stopped right outside the threshold. The brass doorknob began to turn with an agonizing, deliberate slowness. The predator was finally stepping into the light, entirely unaware that the trap was fully and permanently sprung. The brass doorknob clicked, and the heavy oak door swung open. Victor stepped into the dim light of my master bedroom. Through half-closed eyes, I watched his silhouette pause at the threshold. He did not rush to my bedside. Instead, he stood perfectly still, observing me with the cold, detached fascination of a predator assessing a wounded animal. I let out a weak, rattling gasp, allowing my head to loll against the damp pillow. The theatrical makeup did its job perfectly. In the shadows, my skin looked like wet ash, my lips tinged with a sickly purple. Victor slowly closed the door behind him, sealing us in. He walked toward my bed, his shoes silent on the thick carpet. He leaned over me. I could smell his cologne, a sharp contrast to the stale air I was pretending to struggle for. He reached out, taking my wrist. His fingers pressed firmly against my pulse point. I had practiced a rapid, shallow breathing technique that elevated my heart rate, a physical trick that sold the illusion of cardiovascular collapse. He held my wrist for an agonizing minute. A slow, chilling smile spread across his face. He let my arm drop lifelessly back onto the mattress. "You really are fading, William," he whispered, dropping the title of Dad he had used just an hour ago. The lack of empathy in his voice was horrifying. It was the sound of a man who viewed human life as an obstacle on a spreadsheet. He pulled a wooden chair and placed it directly next to my bed. He sat down, crossing his legs, smoothing the crease of his trousers. He let out a satisfied sigh, leaning back and lacing his fingers together. "You have no idea how exhausting it has been, William," he said, his voice dropping to a friendly tone. "Playing the devoted son-in-law, smiling at your tedious stories about civil engineering, pretending to care about load distributions and the nobility of hard work. You are a pathetic relic. You spent 40 years wearing a hard hat, pouring concrete, saving every penny. And for what? To sit alone in this silent house with a flawless credit score and a weak heart. You built a fortune, but you never had the vision to use it. You hoarded wealth like a frightened child. I, on the other hand, understand how the world operates. Money is meant to be leveraged. It is meant to be moved, multiplied, and risked. You looked down on my real estate developments, assuming I was playing with numbers, but I was building an empire. Unfortunately, my last venture ran into snags. The creditors grew impatient. They are not the kind of men who wait for a municipal bond to mature. They demanded $4 million and they threatened to break every bone in my body if I failed to deliver. So I looked at your pristine legacy and I decided to put it to work. It was easy to forge your signature on the guarantor documents. You were completely oblivious. I let out a weak groan, shifting my weight to keep the hidden microphone clear. Victor leaned closer, his eyes gleaming with malicious pride. He believed I was slipping into unconsciousness, incapable of stopping him, but conscious enough to hear his victory speech. "Do not worry about those loans, William," he continued. "They will be paid in full by next week. You see, I took out a $5 million life insurance policy on you a few months ago. The premiums were astronomical, but the potential return on investment was spectacular. The problem was the timeline. You were too healthy. A 70-year-old man with a minor cardiac history could live for another 15 years. I could not afford to wait that long. My associates demanded immediate payment, so I had to accelerate the natural process. I found a supplier who deals in untraceable synthetic stimulants. I carefully emptied your heart medication and replaced it with a compound designed to force a catastrophic myocardial infarction. I watched you swallow those pills every day. I sat at your dining table bringing you hot soup, watching you eagerly consume the poison that was destroying your arteries. It was brilliant. No coroner will ever look past your age and your medical history. They will sign the death certificate citing natural causes, and the offshore insurance company will wire $5 million directly into my personal accounts. It is the perfect invisible crime." He paused, chuckling softly, as he admired his reflection in the dark bedroom window. The magnitude of his narcissism was clear. I kept my breathing ragged, my hands curled into trembling fists under the heavy duvet. "But the most masterful part of my plan," Victor whispered, leaning so close I could feel his breath on my cheek, "involves your daughter. Sarah is so fragile, William. She has always been so desperate to please me, so easily manipulated. She thinks I drained her college funds to make responsible investments. She has no idea about the second mortgages I took out on the Lincoln Park house. But she has been getting restless lately. She cries too much. She threatens to leave." He sneered, a sound of concentrated disgust. "She even tried to hide her secret from me. Did you know she is pregnant 14 weeks along? She thought she could use the child as leverage to walk away. But she misunderstands how power works. Once you expire tonight, she will be shattered. The grief will consume her. And when the baby is born, the exhaustion will break whatever spirit she has left. I have already spoken to a psychiatrist who owes me a considerable favor. He is prepared to diagnose her with severe postpartum depression. We are going to legally declare her mentally unfit to care for a child. I will have her committed to a psychiatric facility. I will secure exclusive custody of the baby, and as her legal guardian, I will assume absolute control over the entire Gallagher estate." The cruelty of his words echoed in the silent room. He was outlining the annihilation of my family, with the detachment of a man ordering a cup of coffee. He was planning to lock my daughter in a psychiatric ward, steal her unborn child, and dance on my grave with my own fortune. Every instinct I possessed screamed to wrap my hands around his throat, to squeeze the life out of his corrupt body. But the federal agent in my earpiece whispered a command to hold my position. The trap required patience. Victor stood up, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. He looked down at me, his face devoid of emotion. "The notary is waiting downstairs, William," he said, his tone shifting back to authority. "It is time to sign the power of attorney. I will guide your hand. Do not try to resist. It will be over soon, and your legacy will belong to someone who knows how to use it. Rest in peace, old man." He turned and walked slowly toward the bedroom door. He was unaware that his confession had just sealed his absolute doom. He stood over me, his shadow blocking the dim light of the bedside lamp. I watched through narrow slits as he pulled a heavy silver fountain pen from his jacket. He uncapped it with a soft, sharp click that sounded exactly like a gunshot. Lifting the legal documents from the nightstand, he rested them on a sturdy leather clipboard. He leaned down, bringing his face mere inches from mine. He grabbed my right hand, his grip incredibly rough and impatient, hauling my arm up from the mattress. He shoved the cold metal pen between my fingers aggressively, forcing my grip. "Sign it, old man," he whispered, his voice a harsh, grating hiss, completely devoid of his fake, practiced charm. "Let us get this over with right now. Just make your mark right here on the dotted line. It does not even have to be perfect. A messy signature proves exactly how weak you were at the end. It makes the illusion complete." He pressed the sharp nib against the thick parchment paper. I intentionally let my hand shake violently, perfectly, playing the role of the dying victim until the absolute last fraction of a second. I wanted him to fully feel the peak of his stolen victory. I wanted his sheer arrogance to finally reach its zenith before I completely annihilated it. And then I stopped trembling. The violent shaking in my right arm ceased instantly, replaced by a cold, deeply rigid stillness. Before his deceitful brain could even process the sudden change in my physical state, I dropped the silver pen onto the mattress. I twisted my hand forcefully outward, entirely breaking his patronizing hold, and securely clamped my fingers directly around his wrist. For 40 years, I had hauled heavy rebar and manually tested the tensile strength of massive concrete foundations. I possessed the crushing, undeniable grip of a civil engineer. I squeezed his wrist with every ounce of furious power I had. I felt the delicate bones in his forearm grind together. Victor let out a sudden gasp of genuine pain, his eyes snapping wide open in absolute shock. He frantically tried to yank his arm away, but my grip was an unyielding iron vise locking him in place. "I prefer to read the fine print, Victor," I said, my voice completely clear, steady, and vibrating with absolute lethal authority. The sickly dying rasp was entirely gone. I sat bolt upright in the bed, my posture perfectly straight, immediately taking deep, healthy breaths. I stared directly and forcefully into his panicked, wildly dilated pupils. I clearly watched the absolute terror wash completely over his pale face as the stark realization hit him exactly like a physical blow. The fragile, broken victim he thought he was killing had vanished instantly, replaced by a man who was entirely in control. "Let go of me right now," he stammered defensively, pulling frantically against my crushing grip, but I did not yield a single millimeter. "You are very sick, William. You are actively having a severe medical delusion. You desperately need to lie back down." "I am absolutely not sick, Victor," I replied, my voice dropping quickly to a highly dangerous quiet register. "And I am certainly not taking your lethal synthetic amphetamines. I know exactly what you secretly put in my biometric safe. I know all about the $4 million commercial loan and the violent shadow syndicate threatening to break your legs. And I also know everything about the $5 million life insurance policy you fraudulently secured behind my back." His handsome face instantly drained of all natural color, perfectly matching the pale, applied theatrical makeup resting on my own skin. His jaw dropped slightly open as his supposedly brilliant, totally foolproof plan disintegrated right in front of his lying eyes. He stopped struggling against me, his entire body going completely limp with the immense crushing weight of the sudden, undeniable exposure. "You absolutely did not outsmart me, Victor," I continued mercilessly, leaning in much closer. "You left a massive trail of forged legal documents and highly toxic capsules. I have actively had hidden cameras recording in this house for weeks. The federal authorities have clearly watched you tamper with my essential medication, and they have been eagerly listening to every single arrogant word you just said, happily bragging about my imminent, fully orchestrated murder." "No," he whispered, weakly, shaking his head frantically, in total denial. "No, that is completely impossible. You are definitely bluffing." I am a civil engineer, Victor, I said very softly. I methodically build traps, and you just blindly walked right into the absolute center of mine. I leaned back slightly, my iron grip still firmly locked onto his trapped wrist, and spoke clearly into the room. The fragile structure has finally collapsed. Take him down now. For a terrifying fraction of a second, Victor simply stared blankly at me. Then the heavy oak doors of the master bedroom violently exploded inward, with a truly deafening, violent crash. The quiet, peaceful suburban illusion was shattered instantly. Half a dozen heavily armed federal agents and highly trained Denver police officers swarmed aggressively into the room, their dark, tactical gear incredibly imposing. Lethal weapons were instantly drawn and leveled directly at Victor's trembling chest. Extremely bright tactical flashlights cut through the darkness, completely blinding him. Federal agents, keep your hands exactly where they are. The lead agent bellowed fiercely, his commanding voice a roaring thunderclap. Do not move a single solitary muscle, Victor screamed out loud in sheer unadulterated terror. I finally released my crushing, painful grip on his arm. He violently stumbled backward, clumsily tripping over the wooden chair and crashing terribly onto the thick carpet. He scrambled backward like a coward, desperately trying to escape, his empty hands raised defensively. Two massive, unyielding agents immediately descended upon him forcefully, hauling him up and slamming him chest first against the bedroom wall. The sharp, satisfying metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs beautifully echoing through the room was the greatest sound I had ever heard. It was the definitive, undeniable sound of absolute justice. You are officially under arrest for attempted murder, massive wire fraud, and interstate extortion, the lead agent stated coldly, securely fastening the tight restraints. You absolutely have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you use it wisely, because everything you arrogantly said tonight has already permanently secured you a tiny cell in federal prison. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and stood up. I wiped the sickly makeup from my face, revealing my healthy complexion. I turned and looked directly at Victor. His expensive suit was ruined, his face a twisted mask of pure panic. The arrogant mastermind was completely gone. He was nothing more than a broken criminal. Downstairs, the corrupt notary was already weeping in federal custody as agents confiscated his forged documents. The criminal apparatus was dismantled. I walked across the bedroom and stood behind the agents holding my son-in-law. Please, he begged, tears streaming down his face. Help me. I looked at him feeling cold closure. I straightened his collar. I hoped the $5 million was worth it. The metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs echoed with a terrifying finality against the bedroom walls. Victor remained pinned against the wallpaper, his chest heaving as he struggled to draw breath into his panicked lungs. The two federal agents held him with an unyielding professional rigidity, their expressions carved from solid stone. I stood just a few feet away, the discarded theatrical makeup smudged across my towel, watching the spectacular collapse of his constructed illusion. His expensive suit, previously a symbol of his arrogant authority, was now violently crumpled and stained with the sweat of his own terror. Footsteps thundered up the staircase. A third agent aggressively hauled the corrupt notary into the master bedroom. The short man was weeping openly, his knees buckling. The agent forced him onto the carpeted floor beside the nightstand, securing his wrists behind his back. The notary whimpered pathetically, babbling desperate confessions, swearing he had absolutely no knowledge of the murder plot, claiming he was simply hired to authorize a standard document. The lead investigator ignored his pleas, gathering the forged papers scattered across the duvet cover and sliding them into an evidence bag. Victor watched the physical manifestation of his greed being sealed away, and a frantic wave of adrenaline surged through his restrained body. He thrashed against the agents holding his arms. "This is a massive misunderstanding," he screamed, his voice cracking with a hysterical edge. "You are making a catastrophic mistake. My father-in-law is severely disoriented. He is suffering from a paranoid delusion. I am just a concerned family member trying to organize his complicated estate before a medical emergency takes him. You have no right to do this. The lead agent did not even bother to look up from the evidence bag. We have a continuous, clear audio recording of you detailing a premeditated homicide to a criminal syndicate. Victor, the agent, stated, his voice incredibly calm. We have the toxicological breakdown of the synthetic amphetamines you placed inside the safe. We have a direct money trail linking your fraudulent loans to the men you just called from this room. There is absolutely no misunderstanding here. Your operation is completely dismantled, and you are going to prison. The undeniable reality. The hard evidence struck Victor like a physical blow to the stomach. His frantic thrashing ceased immediately. His wildly darting eyes searched the room, desperately seeking any possible avenue of escape, any remaining vulnerability he could actively exploit. His gaze finally locked onto my face. The cold, calculated predator instantly tried to morph back into the devoted, caring family man. His facial muscles twitched as he forced an expression of profound manufactured anguish. "William, please listen to me," Victor begged, his voice dripping with an artificial sorrow. "Everything I did, every single choice I made was strictly to protect Sarah. I was drowning in commercial debt. Those men were threatening to destroy me. If I went down, Sarah would have been ruined. I could not let her lose the life we built. I love your daughter more than anything. You have to believe me. Tell these agents to stop. Think of Sarah. Think of the pain this will cause her. You cannot do this." A heavy, expectant silence settled over the bedroom. The only sound was the muffled weeping of the pinned notary on the floor. I looked at Victor, feeling a deep, profound wave of absolute disgust wash over my soul. I did not speak. I simply turned my head slightly toward the far corner of the room. The heavy wooden door of the walk-in closet slowly creaked open. The brass hinges squeaked softly in the tense silence. A female federal agent in dark tactical clothing stepped smoothly out of the shadows, her hand resting firmly on her holstered weapon. Right behind her, stepping into the harsh light of the bedroom, was my daughter. Sarah had been standing inside that dark closet with the agent for the entire duration of the sting operation. She had worn a secure earpiece. She had listened to every single horrific word her husband had spoken. She had heard him coldly brag about poisoning my medication. She had heard him detail his precise timeline for my murder. Most importantly, she had heard his devastating plan for her. She had listened as the man she married outlined his scheme to institutionalize her, steal her unborn child, and seize absolute control of her inheritance. Victor froze entirely. His mouth hung open in a silent, grotesque gasp. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow, terrified ghost. Sarah did not look like a frightened victim anymore. The trembling woman I had comforted in the art gallery 2 days ago was completely gone. She stood tall, her shoulders thrown back, her posture radiating an undeniable strength. The fire of absolute betrayal had burned away her fear, leaving behind a core of unbreakable steel. She walked slowly across the carpet, her eyes locked directly onto the pathetic, ruined man pinned against the wall. "Sarah," Victor whispered, his voice incredibly weak and trembling. "Sarah, my love, please. You know how much I cherish you. You know I would never actually hurt you. I was just saying those things to secure the financial leverage. It was all a desperate negotiation tactic. I swear to you I love you. We are going to have a beautiful baby. We can still fix this. Tell them to let me go. You are my entire world." Sarah stopped directly in front of him. She looked at his desperate, sweating face with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. She raised her right hand. She did not hesitate, and she did not hold back. She delivered a stinging, powerful slap directly across his cheek. The sharp, violent crack of her palm against his skin echoed like a gunshot through the silent room. Victor recoiled, his head snapping to the side, a bright red mark instantly blossoming across his pale flesh. He stared at her, stunned into absolute silence. "You are dead to me," she whispered. Her voice was incredibly soft, yet it carried a lethal weight that completely shattered the remaining fragments of his ego. She turned her back on him without another word and walked into my arms. I wrapped my hands securely around my daughter, pulling her close, shielding her from the man who tried to destroy us. The lead agent gave a swift nod. The officers immediately hauled Victor forward, roughly dragging his stumbling, defeated body out of the master bedroom and down the long hallway. The corrupt notary was pulled up from the floor and marched out, right behind him. We stood together in the quiet room, listening to the heavy footsteps fading down the stairs, followed by the slam of the front door. The suffocating darkness that had invaded our family was finally gone, dragged into the cold night in steel chains. I looked down at my daughter, resting my chin on her head. The ashes of Victor's greed were scattered to the wind. We were finally safe, ready to build a new life on a foundation that could never be broken. The first morning light broke through the large bay windows of my living room, casting a warm golden glow over the spaces where the federal agents had stood just hours before. The house was finally quiet, but it was no longer a heavy, suffocating silence. It was the peaceful quiet of a structure that had survived a brutal hurricane. Sarah had fallen asleep in the guest bedroom, exhausted from the profound emotional toll of the night, resting safely under my roof for the first time in years. I sat at the kitchen island, with a cup of black coffee, watching the steam rise, my mind shifting from the adrenaline of the sting operation to the cold, methodical execution of the legal aftermath. Victor was sitting in a federal holding cell, stripped of his expensive suits and his arrogant illusions, but the corrupted financial architecture he had built still needed to be systematically dismantled. At precisely 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. It was Gregory, carrying a thick leather briefcase that looked significantly heavier than usual. His sharp features were tight with focused energy. He did not bother with pleasantries as he walked into the kitchen and began spreading thick stacks of legal documents across the granite countertop. The federal task force had moved with an unprecedented, blistering speed throughout the night, completely dismantling Victor's carefully constructed empire before the sun even had a chance to rise. The evidence gathered from the hidden cameras and the audio recordings was so overwhelmingly absolute that it triggered an avalanche of immediate legal actions. Gregory explained that the United States Attorney's Office had already secured emergency injunctions from a federal judge. The primary objective was the fraudulent $4 million commercial real estate loan. Victor had forged my signature and used my pristine credit history as the bedrock for his desperate borrowing. Armed with the high-definition confession we had captured, Gregory marched directly into the headquarters of the lending institution the moment their doors opened. The bank executives, terrified of being implicated in a sprawling federal investigation involving attempted murder and wire fraud, completely capitulated. They instantly voided the loan documents bearing my name, completely severing my liability and tying the massive debt exclusively to Victor and his fraudulent corporate entities. My financial legacy, which had been dangerously teetering on the edge of a massive manufactured abyss, was completely restored to solid ground in a matter of hours. But the financial cleansing did not stop there. Gregory handed me a preliminary asset report detailing the swift, brutal freezing of Victor's entire life. Every single bank account, every investment portfolio, and every piece of property tied to his name had been seized by federal authorities under the suspicion of criminal enterprise. The funds he had ruthlessly drained from Sarah's college savings were traced, flagged, and placed in a protected escrow account, fully guaranteed to be returned to her once the forensic accountants finished their meticulous audits. Victor was completely locked out of his own life, reduced to absolute zero. He had traded his freedom and his family for a fortune, and in the end, he was left with absolutely nothing. As the morning progressed, the scope of Victor's deception expanded far beyond a desperate man trying to escape a bad loan. The lead federal agent called Gregory with a crucial update from the ongoing physical searches. When the task force raided Victor's downtown brokerage office, they found a hidden compartment built into the back of his mahogany desk. Inside, they discovered a collection of prepaid burner phones and encrypted hard drives. The technical analysts cracked the encryption before dawn, revealing a horrifying digital paper trail. Victor was not merely borrowing money from a shadowy syndicate. He was actively functioning as a central pivot point in a massive, highly organized offshore money laundering ring. He had been using his legitimate real estate development firm as a front to wash tens of millions of dollars in illicit funds for violent organizations. The $4 million loan was not a singular mistake. It was a desperate attempt to cover a massive shortfall after a laundering cycle went terribly wrong, exposing him to the wrath of the syndicate leaders. He had planned to use the $5 million payout from my staged murder to balance his illicit ledgers and save his own life. The sheer scale of his criminal liability was staggering. He had invited a level of darkness into my daughter's life that was almost impossible to fully comprehend. But the light of absolute justice was now burning away every single shadow he had cast. The legal machinery ground forward with a ruthless, unstoppable momentum. 2 days later, Victor faced his initial arraignment in a heavily guarded federal courtroom. I sat in the second row of the gallery, wearing my best charcoal suit, my posture perfectly straight. Sarah chose to stay home entirely, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her face again. When the heavy wooden side door opened, Victor was led in by 2 large federal marshals. The physical transformation was deeply striking. The polished, charismatic broker was gone. He wore a faded orange jumpsuit, his hands and ankles securely shackled with heavy steel chains. He looked small, pale, and profoundly terrified, his eyes darting around the austere room until they locked onto mine. I did not blink. I simply stared at him with the cold, immovable presence of a concrete wall. The federal prosecutor stood before the judge, outlining the horrific details of the case with a sharp, unforgiving clarity. The charges were read into the official record, a devastating litany of felony offenses: first-degree attempted murder, aggravated identity theft, interstate wire fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and because of the specific nature of his plot against me, severe elder abuse. The prosecutor requested that the judge deny bail entirely, citing Victor as a massive flight risk with extensive offshore connections and a proven willingness to employ lethal violence against his own family members to protect his financial interests. Victor's high-priced defense attorney, a man who had clearly not yet heard the full damning audio recording of the confession, attempted to argue for house arrest. He painted Victor as a dedicated businessman caught in a minor misunderstanding. The judge, an older woman with a stern, deeply perceptive gaze, immediately silenced him. She had reviewed the preliminary evidence, including the toxicology report, detailing the synthetic amphetamines found inside my lockbox, and the transcript of the audio recording, where Victor coldly planned to institutionalize his pregnant wife. She looked down from the high bench, her expression filled with profound judicial disgust. The judge slammed her heavy wooden gavel down, a sound that resonated with the ultimate undeniable power of absolute consequence. Bail was unequivocally denied. The judge stated that the level of calculated predatory malice demonstrated in the evidence made Victor a direct and immediate threat to the community and his own family. He was remanded to federal custody pending a full trial, where he would be facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 30 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early release. Justice had finally been served today. The echo of the courtroom gavel faded, but the silent, systematic work of reclaiming our lives was just beginning. In the engineering world, once a damaged section of a bridge is successfully blown away, you immediately clear the debris to pour a completely fresh layer of solid concrete. Victor was locked behind federal bars, stripped of his status and his freedom, but his toxic signature still lingered on the physical deeds of our family assets. Gregory, true to his word, did not sleep for 48 hours. Armed with the certified federal confession, the wiretap transcripts, and the forensic banking audit, my attorney launched a blistering legal assault to entirely erase my son-in-law from our financial horizon. The primary target was the deed to the beautiful, expansive home I had generously purchased for Victor and Sarah when they were first married. Victor had methodically turned that sanctuary into a tool for extortion, layering it with fraudulent secondary mortgages to pacify his relentless creditors. Gregory filed an emergency partition action in the district court. Because the original down payment had flown directly from my personal accounts, and because the secondary loans were stamped with proven forgeries, the federal judge moved with absolute velocity. The court officially severed Victor's name from the property title, stripping him of any residual ownership rights, and declaring him a hostile debtor to the estate. With his name legally expunged, I made the immediate decision to liquidate the property entirely. I refused to let my daughter return to a structure saturated with the dark, suffocating memories of his psychological terror. We placed the house on the market, and within 24 hours, a private investment group bought it for cash. Every single dollar from that sale was immediately routed into a protected, secure trust account under Sarah's exclusive name. This financial firewall ensured that the capital she would need to raise her unborn child was completely insulated from any future litigation, tax liens, or bankruptcy proceedings stemming from Victor's multi-million-dollar money laundering operations. Once the liquidation was finalized, I packed Sarah's personal belongings and moved her into my newly completed high-tech smart home on the outskirts of Denver. I had built this house to be an absolute fortress of digital and physical security. The entire perimeter was reinforced with high-grade architectural steel monitored by an advanced continuous biometric surveillance grid that tracked every movement along the property line. The entryways required a unique thumbprint scan, and the windows were constructed from ballistic shattered proof glass. Victor had spent years trapping my daughter in a cage of isolation and fear, making her feel small and entirely defenseless. I wanted her to wake up every morning in an environment where safety was not a fragile promise, but an absolute unyielding physical reality. The physical relocation was complete, but the deeper structural repair of her spirit required a much more delicate touch. On a quiet, snowy Thursday evening, the fierce Colorado winter howling softly outside our reinforced windows, Sarah and I sat together in the main study. A massive fire crackled warmly in the stone fireplace, throwing long, comforting shadows across the built-in wooden bookshelves. For the first time in 3 long years, the heavy, constant line of tension in her shoulders had visibly softened. The hyper-vigilant glance she usually cast toward her phone had completely vanished. The device sat dark and forgotten on the far side of the room. Gregory had returned the original forged loan applications, the counterfeit power of attorney documents, and the fraudulent insurance papers to us after the federal prosecutors made duplicate copies for the upcoming trial. I placed the thick manila envelope onto the table between us. Sarah looked at the papers, her eyes dark with a mixture of residual pain and quiet, blooming fury. She picked up the top page, the one where Victor had coldly forged her signature to authorize the draining of her college savings accounts. "We do not need to carry this weight anymore, Sarah," I said gently, leaning forward and placing a reassuring hand over her arm. "The engineering prints for the old building are completely useless once the new foundation is poured. This paper holds no power over your future." She looked at me, a soft, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in months. She stood up, walked slowly over to the hearth, and dropped the forged document directly into the roaring center of the flames. We watched together as the fire aggressively caught the corners of the paper, the heat turning the fraudulent ink to black ash in a matter of seconds. Page by page, document by document, we systematically fed Victor's entire criminal history into the furnace. We threw in the forged second mortgages, the falsified executive life insurance application, and the typed letters where he had planned to institutionalize his own wife for postpartum depression. The fire flared an intense, vibrant orange, consuming the physical evidence of his malice. The literal ashes of his greed floated silently up the brick chimney, dissolving completely into the cold winter night. It was an incredibly cathartic, therapeutic cleansing of our family timeline. With every document that burned away, I could see a layer of suffocating guilt and shame lifting from my daughter's soul. She was finally realizing that the betrayal was not her failure. It was his. She had been targeted by a master manipulator, but her father had stood immovable as a shield to rescue her. We sat back down by the fireplace, the warmth wrapping around us like a thick blanket. Sarah rested her head gently against my shoulder, her hand resting protectively over her abdomen. The baby kicked softly, a quiet, vibrant reminder of the new generation that would soon occupy this sanctuary. I thought about the sheer, terrifying complexity of the trap we had just successfully navigated. Victor had sought to murder me, enslave my daughter, and steal our legacy to pay off a violent shadow syndicate. He had believed his charm and his paper codes made him completely untouchable. But he had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the unyielding protective fury of a father. We had dismantled his empire, voided his fraudulent debts, and secured our physical safety. The long, exhausting war for our survival was officially over. As the fire slowly died down to a soft, glowing bed of embers, a profound, deep sense of peace finally settled into the marrow of my bones. My family was whole. My daughter was free. And the future we were going to build together was going to be cast from the strongest, most resilient materials the world had ever seen. The deep, comforting warmth of that winter fire slowly gave way to the gentle, thawing breezes of the Colorado spring. Over the next 5 months, my high-tech fortress ceased to be merely a secure bunker and truly blossomed into a vibrant, living home. The heavy, suffocating shadow that Victor had cast over my daughter entirely evaporated, replaced by a radiant, undeniable light. I watched with profound, quiet gratitude as the hollow, terrified woman I had rescued from the downtown art gallery slowly transformed back into the fiercely intelligent, joyful Sarah I had raised. The dark circles beneath her eyes completely faded, her cheeks regained their natural, healthy color, and the constant nervous tremor in her hands disappeared entirely. She stopped flinching at sudden noises, no longer expecting the harsh, critical voice of an abuser to echo through the hallways. Instead, our home was filled with the soft, melodic sounds of classical music, the rich aroma of slow-roasted dinners, and the comforting, rhythmic cadence of our daily routines. I had spent my entire career building massive load-bearing structures out of iron and concrete, but carefully nurturing my daughter back to absolute health became the most important, rewarding project of my entire life. We spent our weekends preparing for the arrival of my grandchild. I converted the guest suite on the second floor into a spacious nursery, reinforcing the drywall and installing soundproofing insulation to ensure the baby would always sleep in absolute peace. Sarah and I spent countless hours selecting the perfect soothing shade of pale yellow for the walls, painting the room together while laughing at family memories. We assembled a oak crib, and I personally installed a state-of-the-art encrypted monitoring system that connected directly to a secure server, insulated from any external digital interference. Victor had ruthlessly tried to strip Sarah of her maternal agency, explicitly threatening to steal her child and lock her away in a psychiatric ward. In direct defiance of his cruelty, we built a sanctuary of love, ensuring that her journey into motherhood would be surrounded by impenetrable safety and unwavering, unconditional support. The true depth of our victory became profoundly clear on a Tuesday morning in late May. I drove Sarah to her 20-week anatomical ultrasound appointment at a premier maternal health clinic in downtown Denver. Walking into the medical facility, I felt a familiar protective instinct rise in my chest, but the underlying anxiety was entirely gone. I was no longer a desperate man trying to outmaneuver a lethal predator. I was simply a proud, expectant grandfather accompanying his pregnant daughter. We were guided into a quiet, darkened examination room. The ultrasound technician, a kind woman with a gentle bedside manner, applied the warm, clear gel to Sarah's rounded abdomen and began moving the transducer wand. For a few tense seconds, the large monitor displayed a confusing swirl of gray and black static. Then the image suddenly sharpened, revealing the unmistakable, perfect silhouette of a tiny, developing human being. The room was instantly filled with the powerful sound of a beating heart. The steady thumping cadence echoed from the medical speakers, washing over us like a miraculous symphony. I looked down at Sarah. Tears of joy were streaming continuously down her smiling face, She reached out with her left hand, and I immediately enveloped her small fingers within my strong, calloused grip. We sat there together in the dim light, listening to the magnificent, undeniable sound of a new life. The attending physician walked us through every precise measurement, confirming that the baby was growing flawlessly, measuring perfectly on schedule, and exhibiting absolutely no signs of distress. As I stared at the glowing monitor, a profound, heavy realization settled deep into the marrow of my bones. Victor had aggressively attempted to inject poison into my veins and poison into my daughter's mind. He had sought to completely terminate our family line for a payout. But listening to that heartbeat, I knew with absolute certainty that his toxic legacy had been entirely eradicated. We had survived the darkest, most terrifying storm, and the pure, innocent life flourishing before our eyes was the ultimate, undeniable proof of our victory. We celebrated the flawless medical report with a lunch at a small Italian bistro near the clinic, savoring the simple, beautiful normalcy of our afternoon. The final definitive conclusion to our agonizing ordeal arrived exactly 2 weeks later. I was sitting on the back patio enjoying the warm afternoon sun when my phone vibrated on the glass table. It was Gregory. His voice was incredibly crisp, lacking its usual formal cadence replaced by a tone of satisfaction. He informed me that the relentless, crushing pressure applied by the federal prosecutors had finally broken the last remaining fragments of Victor's arrogant facade. The mountain of incontrovertible evidence had completely neutralized his attorneys. They possessed the audio recording of his explicit murder confession. They held the detailed, undeniable toxicology reports, proving he had deliberately tampered with my critical cardiovascular medication. They had meticulously documented the entire complex offshore money laundering apparatus, clearly tracing every single stolen dollar directly back to his fraudulent corporate accounts. Faced with the absolute terrifying certainty of a guilty verdict and a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole, Victor had completely surrendered. Gregory explained that Victor had officially accepted a plea agreement drafted by the United States Attorney General's office. He had fully confessed to first-degree attempted murder, massive interstate wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and extensive conspiracy to commit money laundering. In exchange for his total cooperation and the forfeiture of every single remaining asset to a federal restitution fund, he was sentenced to 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The plea deal entirely eliminated the need for a prolonged public trial. Sarah would never have to take the witness stand. She would never have to look at his deceitful face or listen to his manipulative lies ever again. Victor would be incarcerated until he was an elderly, broken man, entirely stripped of his wealth, his status, and his freedom. I thanked Gregory for his unwavering dedication and slowly ended the call. I walked back inside the house and found Sarah in the nursery, carefully folding a stack of pastel-colored blankets. I stood in the doorway, watching her peaceful, methodical movements for a long moment before I quietly delivered the news. I told her about the finalized plea agreement, the 25-year sentence, and the absolute permanent closure of the case. She paused, her hands resting gently on the edge of the wooden crib. She did not cry. She did not express any anger or sorrow. She simply took a deep breath, letting the final heavy weight of his existence completely leave her body. The man who had tried to destroy us was now nothing more than a tightly closed file in a federal archive. The chapter on Victor was irrevocably finished. Our new normal had officially begun, built on a foundation of absolute truth, impenetrable safety, and the fierce, unconditional love of a father who would tear down the world to protect his own child and grandchild. The peaceful rhythm of our new life was beautiful. But as the weeks turned into months, I realized that simple survival was not enough. I had spent 40 years building physical structures that could withstand immense pressure, but the emotional architecture of my twilight years required a different kind of reinforcement. I could not simply let the nightmare fade into the background. I had to forge it into something permanent, something that would stand as an unbreakable shield for others. On a crisp Tuesday morning in early September, I drove downtown to Gregory's office. The city of Denver was bustling with its usual frantic energy, but my mind was entirely focused on a singular crystal-clear objective. Gregory was waiting for me in his grand corner office, the familiar scent of rich leather and fresh coffee greeting me as I walked through the heavy oak doors. We sat across from each other at his large mahogany conference table, the very same table where we had planned the legal destruction of my son-in-law just a few months prior. Between us sat a thick, pristine portfolio. It contained the finalized financial statements of my reclaimed estate. With the massive $4 million fraudulent loan entirely voided and the corrupted secondary mortgages completely expunged from my legal record, my personal capital had been fully restored. Furthermore, the aggressive liquidation of the properties Victor had tainted left me with a substantial reserve of liquid assets. I possessed more wealth than Sarah and my grandchild could ever reasonably need in a single lifetime. I looked down at the neatly typed numbers on the ledger. Money in its rawest form is merely potential energy waiting to be directed. Sitting idle in an insured bank account, it served absolutely no purpose other than gathering modest interest. I looked up at Gregory, who was watching me with a quiet, perceptive anticipation. He knew I had not scheduled this formal meeting simply to review standard banking balances. I am not going to let the trauma of the past year define the rest of my life, Gregory, I said, my voice steady and vibrating with absolute conviction. Victor almost succeeded because he operated in the shadows, exploiting the natural trust that exists within a family. He preyed on the assumption that an older man would be too confused, too isolated, or too embarrassed to fight back against financial manipulation. I want to build a mechanism that actively hunts down predators exactly like him. I slid a single sheet of paper across the polished wood. On it, I had written the proposed name of a new non-profit organization, the Vigilant Elders Legal Defense Fund. Gregory read the name aloud, a slow, approving smile spreading across his sharp features. I explained my vision in meticulous detail. I wanted to establish a dedicated, aggressively funded organization designed specifically to provide absolutely free forensic accounting, expert private investigation, and ruthless legal representation to senior citizens who suspected they were being financially abused by their own family members. Most elderly victims do not have a civil engineer with a massive bank account and a brilliant lawyer ready to tear the world apart for them. I continued, leaning forward. They are trapped in their own homes, watching their life savings being systematically drained by the very people they raised, entirely unable to afford the specialized legal help required to stop the bleeding. We are going to provide that help. We are going to deploy elite forensic auditors to track the stolen money, highly trained investigators to gather the undeniable proof, and attorneys who will take these domestic predators to federal court and completely destroy their lives. Gregory leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers together. It is an incredibly ambitious project, William. It will require a massive initial capital investment, a highly secure operational headquarters, and a network of professionals who are willing to fight ugly battles in the darkest corners of family courts. I told him I was prepared to endow the foundation with an immediate injection of $5 million from my personal reserves. Gregory did not hesitate for a single second. He immediately pulled a legal pad toward him and began sketching the corporate charter for the foundation. He agreed to sit on the board of directors and personally oversee the recruitment of the most vicious, effective litigation attorneys in the state of Colorado. We spent the next 3 hours mapping out the logistical framework of the organization, defining the precise intake protocols for potential victims, and establishing the legal boundaries of our investigative authority. By the time I left his office, the conceptual blueprint was complete. The foundation was no longer just an idea. It was a tangible, heavily armed entity rapidly moving toward reality. But a project of this magnitude required one critical component to function safely. If we were going to actively investigate sophisticated financial criminals and hostile family members, our digital infrastructure had to be absolutely impenetrable. We needed a master architect for our cybersecurity. There was only one person I trusted with that immense responsibility. The following afternoon, I drove out to the sprawling suburban neighborhood where this entire nightmare had begun. I parked my car in front of the elegant stone house that Victor and Sarah had once tried to buy. I walked up the paved driveway and rang the doorbell. A few moments later, the heavy wooden door opened, revealing Mitchell. He looked exactly as I remembered him from that fateful evening in his living room, carrying the quiet, observant demeanor of a man who understood how to protect sensitive information. He looked surprised to see me standing on his porch, but he quickly invited me inside. We sat down in his bright, meticulously organized home office. I took a deep breath and told him the entire story. I told him how his single brave phone call warning me about Victor had been the absolute catalyst for my survival. I explained the hidden cameras, the forged commercial loans, the planned poisoning, and the federal sting operation that had finally sent my son-in-law to a maximum security prison for 25 years. Mitchell listened in absolute silence, his eyes wide with profound shock, as the true, horrifying scale of Victor's manipulation was laid bare. When I finally finished the story, I leaned forward and looked him directly in the eyes. "You saved my life, Mitchell," I said softly. "Your willingness to step outside your professional boundaries and warn a complete stranger gave me the crucial head start I needed to build a defense. Now I need you to help me save others. We need someone to run our cybersecurity. I am offering you an unlimited professional budget." He sat totally motionless, absorbing the immense weight of my sudden, unexpected proposal. He looked at the framed family photographs resting on his polished mahogany desk, then looked directly back at my waiting face. He stood up, extended his hand, and smiled. "I am completely in William," he said. "Let us go hunt down some domestic predators." The new foundation was finally poured, now perfectly ready to fiercely protect the truly innocent ones. The months that immediately followed my intense meeting inside Mitchell's office transformed my existence from a quiet retirement into a relentless crusade. The Vigilant Elders Legal Defense Fund did not just slowly materialize, it forcefully erupted into existence, fueled by my vast capital and an absolute, uncompromising demand for justice. Mitchell proved to be an absolute genius in the digital realm. He constructed a cybersecurity grid for our Denver headquarters that easily rivaled federal intelligence agencies in sheer complexity. He personally developed secure, highly encrypted intake portals where vulnerable seniors could submit their harrowing financial suspicions entirely undetected by the predatory family members living under their own roofs. We aggressively hired a dedicated team of elite forensic accountants who could expertly trace a single stolen dollar through a dozen murky offshore accounts. Gregory assembled a formidable roster of litigators who viewed elder financial abuse not just as a standard crime, but as a profound moral failing that required absolute destruction in the courtroom. We were receiving dozens of desperate, heartbreaking inquiries every single week. We were actively freezing fraudulent assets, swiftly recovering stolen life savings, and putting domestic manipulators directly into federal holding cells. I was no longer just a retired civil engineer, simply passing the time waiting for the end. I had found a profound, undeniable, and electrifying purpose. Every single legal victory, every stolen house legally returned to an elderly widow, every fraudulent loan instantly voided by our attorneys, felt like a direct, continuous triumph over Victor and the dark, manipulative shadow he had desperately tried to cast over our lives. We were catching monsters before they could finish building their traps, while the foundation flourished with an unstoppable momentum. An even more beautiful and profound transformation was quietly taking place inside my high-tech fortress in Colorado. Sarah blossomed into motherhood with a fierce, radiant strength that brought tears of profound gratitude to my eyes every single day. The crippling anxiety that had once defined her every waking moment was entirely gone completely, replaced by a calm, unyielding confidence. She began working part-time with the foundation, bravely using her own harrowing experience to gently guide terrified new victims through the agonizing process of untangling their complicated lives from their abusers. She was no longer a victim hiding in a closet. She was a hardened survivor, a magnificent beacon of absolute hope for others standing in the darkness. As the crisp, biting winds of the Colorado winter slowly yielded to the vibrant, thawing warmth of an early spring, the defining moment of our entire journey finally arrived. On a beautiful, clear Tuesday morning, accompanied by the gentle, steady hum of medical monitors in a secure downtown hospital suite, my grandson took his very first breath. The exact moment I heard his sharp, vibrant cry echo through the sterile room, a heavy residual weight that I did not even realize I was still carrying, completely lifted from my weary soul. I watched Sarah hold her beautiful, healthy baby boy tightly against her chest, her exhausted face illuminated by an absolute, unconditional love. Victor had desperately tried to steal this child. He had tried to weaponize this innocent life for his own greedy, sociopathic ambitions. But he had utterly failed. The baby was surrounded by a wall of impenetrable love and safety, miles away from the cold, calculating grasp of a convicted monster. Now, as the golden hues of a crisp Denver evening slowly filter through the large bay windows of my living room, the profound reality of our hard-fought victory settles deeply into my bones. The house is completely silent, save for the rhythmic, comforting creak of the wooden rocking chair. I sit by the warm fireplace, gently holding my newborn grandson in my arms. He is sleeping peacefully, his tiny, fragile fingers curled securely around the fabric of my sweater. He breathes with a soft, steady cadence, entirely unaware of the massive, violent storm that preceded his arrival into this world. I look down at his perfect, innocent face, feeling a surge of protective devotion so intense it physically aches within my chest. I will spend every remaining breath in my body, ensuring that he grows up knowing only truth, honesty, and safety. He will never know the cold sting of betrayal. He will never be manipulated by the people who are supposed to protect him. He will learn to build things that last, just like his grandfather did. My gaze slowly lifts from the sleeping infant and travels across the spacious, warmly lit room. High up in the far corner, discreetly tucked away behind a decorative crown molding, sits the small black lens of a hidden camera. It is the exact same camera system that initially exposed Victor's dark, murderous conspiracy. It is the silent, unblinking electronic witness that captured his arrogant confession, saved my life, and completely dismantled his fraudulent empire. For a brief, fleeting moment, the vivid memory of Victor standing over my bed with a silver pen and a heart full of lethal malice flashes through my mind. But the image holds absolutely no power over me anymore. It is completely hollow, utterly devoid of any lingering terror. I am not the fragile, dying victim he so desperately wanted me to be. I am the architect of his absolute destruction. I continue rocking the chair, a deep, genuine smile slowly spreading across my weathered face. The profound peace in this room is not an accident. It is a masterpiece of deliberate, uncompromising design. We successfully tore down a toxic, dangerous structure, completely cleared the deceptive wreckage, and poured a brilliant new foundation forged from absolute truth. The shadows have been entirely banished from our family. I look directly at the small, glowing red light of the camera lens in the corner, feeling an overwhelming sense of closure. The predator has been permanently caged, the innocent have been fiercely protected, and the long, agonizing battle is finally, definitively over. We are perfectly safe now. Mitchell sent me a secure message just an hour ago, confirming that our foundation successfully intercepted 3 more fraudulent wire transfers this week, saving 3 more families from absolute ruin. His unyielding dedication perfectly honors the miraculous phone call that started this entire cascade of undeniable justice. Our pain was simply the necessary catalyst to build a much larger shield. The legacy we are leaving behind will outlive us all, firmly standing as a permanent, immovable fortress against anyone who dares to prey on the vulnerable. I lean my head back against the sturdy wooden frame of the rocking chair, pulling my sleeping grandson just a fraction closer to my beating heart. The warm firelight dances softly across the walls, casting a radiant, beautiful glow over our peaceful sanctuary. I close my eyes completely, letting go of the past, fully embracing the beautiful, untainted future that lies ahead. The darkness is entirely gone, replaced by an unbreakable, brilliant light that will forever guide our path forward. The protective structure is fully complete, absolutely secure, and beautifully flawless. My work is finally done. The screen slowly fades to a very quiet, serene, and perfectly absolute, unbroken dark and beautiful black. Trust is a beautiful gift, but blind trust is a dangerous liability. The greatest weapon an abuser has is the belief that you will remain silent to keep the peace. Never let the fear of destroying your family prevent you from uncovering the truth, because a family built on deception is already broken. Protect your assets, verify the intentions of those around you, and always remember that true strength is not about enduring terrible abuse. It is about having the absolute courage to burn down a toxic reality so that you can build a safe, honest future from the ashes. Greed can turn the people closest to us into absolute strangers, but the truth will always eventually find the light. Have you ever uncovered a deeply painful truth about someone you trusted? Share your unique story in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more.